book the busy, but we can always share some dead scenes. It's just a cup in time. This song doesn't have to rhyme. Life's all of us, not every moment we can be feeling fine. I wanna share a moment, just a second if you will, maybe even a cup of thrill. We could share this performance. It's tea time, come sit with me.
Well, welcome guys, Miss Liz in the house. And today I do want to put a warning out there that there will be a trigger warning coming up and down off the screen today during our conversation with Liz. And she has an incredible name, Elizabeth, but her name is Liz and Hirsh Naftali. I hope I'm saying it right. If not, I will get her to pronounce it correctly for me once she's out here. But before we get started, you guys know how Miss Liz rolls. Get over to all those platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, all those good platforms. Give them a like, follow, and subscribe, and get these tea times out there because they do make a difference for all my guests and people that are listening to the stories that resonate with the stories that come to tea time. Also, check out the podcast apps, Spotify, Podbean, Listen Notes, and check out babyboomers.org because Miss Liz is partnered with them, and you can find some incredible other podcasts out there as well. So let's get the disclaimer and then a beautiful intro, and then we're going to get Liz in here and we're going to spill her tea. And her tea is truth, resilience, and hope. That is the tea that we are serving today on Tea Time with Miss Liz. Disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live show. Miss Liz's Tea Time is a global platform dedicating to sharing real life stories, diverse perspectives, and meaningful conversations that inspire awareness, healing, and connection. I, Miss Liz, is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment during the live broadcast, please grant StreamYard permission to display your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that all the content brought forward during any Tea Time show is presented in good faith. However, discussions may include opinions, beliefs, and perspectives that do not necessarily represent the views of Miss Liz or the Tea Time platform. Information shared by guests is based on their own experiences and is perceived to be accurate at the giving time of airing. All guests, viewers, and participants are responsible for using their own good judgment when considering any action or decision that may relate to these discussions. Some episodes may cover sensitive topics, including but not limited to trauma, abuse, grief, mental health, and other emotionally triggering subjects. Listeners and viewers' discretion is strongly advised. Tea Time with Miss Liz is an open discussion forum designed to offer insight, inspire awareness, and create connection. It is not a substitute for professional, medical, legal, or therapeutical advice. If you require professional support, please seek assistance from qualified professionals or trusted resources in your area. If you have any questions regarding this disclaimer or the content of the discussion, you are welcome to contact me, aka Miss Liz, directly at bookingmissliz@gmail.com or check out my link tree, Miss Liz's Tea Time. By choosing to participate in, comment on, or view these live shows, you acknowledge and accept this disclaimer. Your participation is entirely voluntary. I, Miss Liz, welcomes you to join the conversation with an open heart, and if at any time you feel this platform is not right for you, I respect your wishes and decision and welcome you back whenever you are ready. Tea Time with Miss Liz is serving truth and awareness one cup at a time. Well, welcome to Tea Time with Miss Liz, where stories are shared with truth, courage, and the kind of strength that comes from lived experiences. Today's guest brings a story that is deeply personal, one that carries loss, resilience, and a relentless commitment to humanity. Please join me in welcoming Liz Hirsh Naftali, author, advocate, and voice for families impacted by unimaginable circumstances. Liz is the great aunt of Abigail Mor Edan, a young child who was taken hostage during the tragic events of October 7, 2023. In the face of profound loss and heartbreak, Liz stepped forward, not just as a family member, but as an advocate, working tirelessly to raise awareness and fight for the release of hostages. Her book, Saving Abigail, shares a deeply moving account of her family's experience, the resilience of a child, and the unwavering determination to bring attention to those still in captivity. Though through her journey, Liz has met with leaders, communities, and committees and individuals around the world, turning personal pain into a mission of awareness, advocacy, and hope. So grab your cup and lean in. Today's tea time is about courage, resilience, and the power of using your voice when it matters most. Let me get Liz in here and let's spill some tea. Welcome, Liz.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me.
It is a pleasure to have you, Liz. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. If not, if you could just share it with my listeners out there.
It's Naftali. You're very close.
Naftali.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you, Liz, for joining me, but I'm going to take you down a road that I take all my guests down so we can get to know you a little bit before we get to know your story. Who was Liz as a little girl and who is Liz now?
It's very interesting because I've been thinking a lot about myself as a little girl. And I'll tell you a story, which was when I was little, I was a tomboy. I wanted to play with all the boys, sports. And when I was growing up, we weren't allowed to. Like Little League was only for boys. And I remember when my brother, who was a year and a half older than I was, he played t-ball and I wanted to play t-ball. And I was probably a better athlete than he was, but he was a boy, so he got to be on the team. And who was I put together a little letter and I went around and tried to get the other mothers and fathers to sign it. They didn't, because back then it was just so mentally like this was like a little boy's sport. But that's who I was. And I think that's kind of still who I am. When I don't see something that's right or when I want to do something, I respectfully try to go out and change it or bring others along with me to change it. And I was thinking about that story when I was little and I had to have been like 4 years old. But even then I wanted to fix something and do something that I wasn't allowed to do, but try to get permission or try to get into it. And that's kind of who I am still, which is sometimes fighting norms, but also looking to make change that I think is appropriate and important.
And we talked about that just before we went live on how we want to see change. So we'll get into that a little bit later into the show. I want to thank everybody that's jumping on today's tea time. I do want to put a warning out there that it will be triggering for some. So if it does affect you, please, I will not be offended if you have to leave the show. But we do want you to listen to the message that Liz is going to bring to the table today. Liz, who are you now as a grown woman?
So I think of myself as I'm a grandmother. I just had my first grandchild. I didn't, my daughter did. And I have 5 beautiful children, but I have a beautiful granddaughter now. She's just 6 weeks old. And that to me, being a mom and a grandmother is my most important, precious role in life. I've been a business person for many years. I grew up in a family that was involved in clothing and real estate in Los Angeles. And that was something I just learned from the time I was like 12 years old. I used to work with my father on the weekends. So I've been working forever, and that is my day job, I'll call it. But what 2.5 years ago was I became a hostage advocate. And that was after my great niece Abigail was taken as a hostage on October 7th. And that morning, her parents, my niece and her husband, my niece Smadar and her husband Roe, were murdered by terrorists that came into their home. And Abigail and her siblings witnessed it. Abigail was 3, Michael was 9, and Amalia was 6, these 3 little children. But Abigail was in her father's arms, and we all believed that she had been killed when he was killed, but she had miraculously survived. And when we learned that she had survived, I all of a sudden became something I never in my life imagined I would do, which was become this advocate for hostages and for Abigail. But it was this moment of knowing that this 3-year-old child could be saved and could be brought back from Gaza. And that's what I became then. And to be honest, like that role has evolved where the hostages did come back, and Abigail came back after 51 days, but there were hostages that didn't finally come home for 800 days. And once you start to help people and your child, your grandchild, your great niece comes back, you still stay in it, because what you realize is these are all people that are going through their Abigail, their child is still missing and is still a hostage. So that's who I became. And one of the things that I like to tell people is that before October 7th, I had started a podcast myself where I talked with leaders, Democrats, Republicans, men, women in America, all different people, because what I understood was that we needed to have conversations like you and I are, where you could be different in many ways, but if you could just listen and hear other people's stories. So for me, it was growing up in America and thinking, how is it that we are so polarized? And if you're on one political party or the other, you should not talk. And so before October 7th, I started this, and I started hearing these amazing stories from people from very different backgrounds. And then after October 7th, as an advocate for hostages, I was actually going into these offices of leaders and having these important conversations with leaders who were from different parties, different religions, different ethnic groups, and understanding that if we shared stories like I am today, hopefully we can change some hearts and actually find ways to work together.
Absolutely. And like you said, we need to start having these conversations. It's not even about parties anymore. It's about people. Stop the division and stop putting us into different boxes. It's about saving lives. I'm going to pull up the book. So if you want to share a little bit about that, Liz, so the viewers can check out this incredible book and this little incredible girl. So tell us a little bit about this book.
So this is Abigail, and this picture was taken a little before she was kidnapped. And I love this photo because it just shows a 3-year-old child who could be any of our grandchildren, nieces, siblings. And Abigail, I wrote the book called Saving Abigail because what I understood was it wasn't just me. There were so many people that worked to save Abigail, including President Joe Biden, congressional leaders, Democrats, Republicans, people on both sides of the aisle in America, and leaders around the world. But truly, we had so much support from people around the world, who understood that on October 7th, not only were 1,200 people killed, murdered, my niece and her husband, but 250 people were stolen, kidnapped. And Abigail was one of 36 children under the age of 18. And so what I did was I took this photo and I used it to tell people not just about another hostage or a child, but to actually show them the face of the 3-year-old child. And I had leaders from all over the world understanding this was the face of a hostage. And in America, I had Democrats and Republicans sharing this photo. And President Biden and his team understood that Abigail and many children were hostages. And so this book was written so that I could tell the story of what happened on October 7th, but then really, Miss Liz, is to tell the story of my advocacy, because before that, I thought I was doing good things in the world and I was a nice person, I was helping others. But then I realized that I hadn't done enough. And what I needed to do was do everything to bring Abigail and the hostages home with others. And that turned me into this person that understood that each day I'm blessed. I'm very blessed. But what more can I do for others? And as we were speaking earlier, one of the things that I think is the most important places right now and where I take this book is getting out and making a difference. And I tell the story, my story and Abigail's story and our family story. And I think you said in the beginning, it's the true story of October 7th. It's the resilience of this 3-year-old child who survived in her father's arms, covered in his blood, and went for help, but then was taken as a hostage, but then got back. And it's the resilience of so many people that helped to bring home Abigail and all the hostages. And it's the hope that this child represents a world that we're all going to fight harder for, and to make sure that we are the ones that are directing our leaders to fight for children and not to fight each other.
I like that message, fight for our children, not fight each other. We had a really deep conversation just before we went live, and we were talking about this, right? The children are the next future. They're our next generation. And as grandmas, both of us being grandparents, we're really afraid for the children, the next generation. So how can we change that? I want my listeners today to understand that today's conversation is about how can we make a change? How can you make a change? How can you start saying, you know what, let's change the world by making it better? stop the world, the wars, and stop the fighting, and stop picking the parties, this party over that party. It has nothing to do with the parties anymore. It has to do with saving lives. We have some questions that are coming in that I'd like to get out to you, Liz. The first question we have for you here is, how did Liz stay so strong through all of this? It's truly inspiring.
Well, first, I was strong as I could be, but there were plenty of nights or times I was walking in like New York City where I was, or Washington, D.C. where I was, that I just was bawling. I was just crying. And there were days where it was just hard to figure out what to eat and how to sleep. But what I understood, and it's interesting because I did a lot of media and I did a lot of meetings, and what I understood was when I was in front of people or a camera, if I cried, I didn't get my message across. If I broke down, I wasn't helping Abigail. I wasn't helping the next hostage that needed to come out. And I also understood that, first, I think when I said, like, when I was a little girl trying to fight to get to play Little League, T-ball, I understood you had to fight for things. And I don't remember even waking up when I was like 5 years old and crying. I didn't get to play, but I understood I'm going to keep fighting for things. And in this case, I have to tell you, like, there were so many moments of just despair, so many moments of feeling how horrible it is, imagining what hostages were going through. For 51 days, I hoped that Abigail was actually with a woman that we believe she had been taken off the kibbutz when we realized that she was a hostage. But we didn't know. I didn't know if Abigail was alone. And just the feeling of knowing hostages were in the dark, that they were starving. But I also knew that in order for us to bring them home, we had to keep strong and we had to keep telling their story. And I tell this when I speak often around the world, in Jewish groups, Christian groups, Muslim groups, everybody. What I say to each person, and everybody I hope listening, whatever you're passionate about, please don't wait for a tragedy to happen, but find out what you're passionate about. And if there is a tragedy or something that you feel like that you could make a difference, go out and make a difference. If everybody that is listening today were to go out and tell their story, or if go and tell Abigail's story, tell a story, we start to make a change by telling our stories. And for me, it's telling the story of a 3-year-old whose parents were murdered, who was taken as a hostage, and now as a free little girl who is now just 6 years old, I keep fighting because I want her world to be a better place.
Liz, we have a question here. Is Abigail with family today?
Yes, so Abigail and her brother and sister, who that morning they survived and they hid in a closet for 14 hours. After they were able to be rescued from their home, they were taken off their community, which is called a kibbutz in Israel, which is a neighborhood right along the border with Gaza. And her brother and sister went to their uncle and aunt, and then another uncle and aunt that were on the same community. Once they were evacuated with their kids, they went to the aunt and uncles. And once Abigail was released, she went there. So all of this time, I say that to you just because this is a big, beautiful family and we all take care of each other. But Abigail and her brother and sister now live with their cousins who are their siblings and their aunt and uncle who are their parents. And they are part of there's 6 children that are really blessed. And I say that after all the tragedy, they're blessed because they love each other and they have each other. And Abigail and Michael and Amalia are part of a beautiful family.
And Liz, how many hostages were there in total?
At the beginning, there were about 252. At the beginning, within a week, they let a woman and her daughter who were from Chicago, they freed them. But then there were 250 hostages. And keep in mind, those 250, as I said, 36 of them were under the age of 18. 12 of them were American. There were Buddhists, there were Christians, there were Muslim. Yes, they were Jewish. There were people from other nations, people from Southeast Asia, Europeans, Canadians. There were people from all over the world. Many of them were Jewish, but many of them weren't. Many of them were Israelis, but others weren't. And there were Arabs. There were Muslim, Arab neighbors, people that were part of their communities in that area that were also taken as hostages. So this was a direct assault on anybody that was living or at that moment on October 7th along the border with Gaza.
We have a question here. For myself, I would just like to get the message out there. What message do you hope viewers will take away today, Liz, with your story?
I think the message is there's two parts. One is the truth of what happened on October 7th, which is very important for me because I know what happened and my family was very tragically affected. And there's been, since October 7th, many different stories that have been put out on social media and around the world. And for me, it is very important to tell the truth of October 7th, what happened to my family and 250 people taken hostage and over 1,200 murdered, and many of them little children in their homes on October 7th. So for me, the truth is very important. And that is something I want people to walk away knowing the truth of that day and reading the book or understanding our story. But what I think that people can do as a takeaway is, and I say this every time, please go out and fight for what you believe in. Get up and say, this is what I stand for. It can be something in your community, it can be something in your schools, it could be something in your church or your temple. But if you believe in something, show up. And I think the other thing that I really tell people is go and talk to people who are different. We find ourselves so often staying in our bubble. We find ourselves so often talking to people, listening to the news that we want to hear, listening to the people we want to hear. And I'm about like reaching out. I'm not about people treating you badly, but I am about reaching out and finding people who are different, hearing their stories, because I believe that change will come when we all stand up and do, first we tell the truth, we stand up and fight for what we believe in, and we work together. And when you work together, it has to be with people that are a little bit different, because that togetherness is what's going to make a change.
You know, and those are powerful messages right there. Tell the truth, stand up and work together. It's that easy, you know, but yet we make it so complicated.
Yeah.
We have a comment here that says, this story gave me chills, so heartbreaking, yet so hopeful. And that's the message we want to give, right? It was a hard time. There were lives lost, but let's keep the hope, right? Let's keep the message going. Let's get people out and reading the story and that as well. What was the hardest part of writing Saving Abigail for you, Liz?
I think that the hardest part was keeping it short, keeping it easy for people to read, because my goal was not, there were hostages. I wasn't having big book shows and big book demonstrations and selling the book in a positive, like what we imagine, like people when they write a book and they have big parties. I had events where I was talking about the hostages. And for me, it was about making sure that we get those hostages and we don't forget about speaking about them. And by the way, not only in the communities around the world and in America for me, but also around the world, but also our leaders. And so bringing this book and having it shared was for me like, that was hard, because I didn't have somebody saying, hey, Liz, you're going to be a bestseller on Amazon. Thank you for writing the book. But what I understood, and this was the hardest part, was that if I could tell my story, Abigail's story, my story, and many other people who were in this fight together for the hostages. By the way, Democratic President Joe Biden, Republican President Donald Trump, I write about it in the book. I write about going to the DNC, the Democrats Convention, the RNC, the Republicans Convention. Because what I wanted was, if it was easy, I could just say, yeah, we went to a few people, we got the job done. But it wasn't. It was 2.5 years of a lot of hard work. And for me, when you say like the hardest part about writing the book was making sure that I could get enough information so people who are listening today and others would, one, want to read it because it wasn't too long, and two, to keep it, it's a page turner. You want to know what's going to happen next. You want to understand. And I really think that while it wasn't hard, but I think it was my challenge was to bring people in emotionally so they could understand what happened to Abigail and what I was going through being this great aunt trying to bring her home.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Some books are written not just for those parties, not just for those awards, Amazon bestsellers. Some books are out there to change lives. And I like that you put the attention on the real purpose, the hostage. You had to bring those hostages home, by writing a book and getting that attention out there with people that may have not even known about it because they weren't watching the news or they weren't paying attention and didn't even know what was going on, but they bought the book and they're like, oh my goodness, this is going on like right now. We got to get these people home. You said it took 2.5 years to get these hostages home. So are they all released now, Liz?
Yeah, so the last hostage was a young man who on October 7th had been injured, but he went out and he was defending and trying to save people's lives, and he was killed and taken as a hostage. And he was only released in January of this year. The last remaining living hostages, they were released, men, October 13th, 2025. And that was a great relief because there were still some hostages who were deceased, but the live men, the final group, was released on October 13th. And that was just one of those days where I could sort of start to breathe again in terms of this process, because while I was still going to fight to bring home all the hostages, even if they were deceased, for me, knowing that these young men were alive and back with their families, with their partners, their mothers, their sisters, their fathers, that was a moment after just over 2 years of thinking, okay, we've gotten them home. And that was under a Trump administration. And all this work started under a Biden administration. And so these hostages were something that I believe showed that America could come together and our leaders could fight for the same thing and not be on opposite sides. And that's another message that I got from this whole process.
We have a question here about your humanitarian work that I want to get out. How can people support your humanitarian work today, Liz?
Well, I don't have it formalized, but first, I think if you know people who are interested or who need to know what happened, that Saving Abigail is a really important book to bring out to them to buy. And again, the proceeds from this, they support my advocacy, they support my family that was lost everything on October 7th. So this is a book that I also use to generate that income to support them. And the woman who was staying with Abigail, let me repeat that. The woman who took care of Abigail as a hostage in Gaza, who also lost everything that day. And she took care of Abigail, her name is Hagar, and her 3 children for 51 days with no food, very little hygiene, in a dark room, and silencing 4 children under the age of 10. That's how they spent 51 days. So when you say, how can you help my advocacy? Well, it really starts with telling the story. And the other part, and I really mean this, is be an advocate yourself. If I can give anybody, I'm going to keep going. And I'm blessed to be able to have the power in my own mind and my hands and in my heart to go and do this work. But I say to anyone who's listening, if you want to help my advocacy, I'm asking you to go out and be an advocate. Go out and fight for something in your community, in your world that you believe in. We can all make change. And I also like to have this illumination of, if we are all lights of change, if I'm just one, you can give me some money, you can say how great I am, but I'm just one. Yeah. But if others join me and we do this work together, when for me, children in peace, the air our children breathe, the schools they go to, we could go on and on. Healthcare, anything that's important to people listening, please just go out, and that will mean that you got something from me. That will give me the greatest feeling of we're moving forward.
And that's what it's all about, right? One person, the next person, it's the ripple effect. It takes one person to say, you know what, we need change. And then the next person saying, you know what, we need change, we need change. And that's how the ripple effect helps. And it makes the changes in the world. But what's happening is we got one change maker, then we got 3 roadblockers. We got to move the roadblockers out of the way, and we got to say, you know what? No, let's gather together. Let's hold hands and let's walk side by side, not one behind the other or one in front of the other, but side by side, and actually make that difference and actually come together and be that change. Humanitarian work is so simple. If you see something you don't agree with, stand up and be that change. It's not that hard. And Liz seen it, and she was like, you know what? This is not right. I'm making a change. That's how humanitarian works. We have it so complicated that people think that you have to be this big leader, you have to be the big supervisor, or the successful millionaire. And no, you can be an everyday person making a difference, and you can just get out there and be that change. And this comment right here from Todd, this is why storytelling matters. Powerful message. It starts with the stories, guys, and that's what Liz is saying today. Share the stories, be the advocate, stand up and be that difference. We have a question here for you, Liz, is what lessons about resilience and hope do you want future generations to remember from this experience?
That neither one of these are easy. Resilience and hope are hard, because resilience doesn't just mean you were strong. It meant, and you said it meant that you fought against the odds. You did something and you did not give up because it was hard. So for me, that is a message that people can take away. And then hope, which isn't just like an easy, flimsy word, but hope is a really powerful word. And if you use hope, it's based on the odds are against you, or something you want to achieve is very challenging. You don't just say, I hope I'm going to have French toast on Saturday at the restaurant. That's not what you say. Hope is something that is really, in some ways, very spiritual, because it's very much integral in who you are, and you know that it's hard. So when you ask like the takeaway and what I believe and why, I just think of resilience as something. You start with the truth, and then the resilience is fighting to make sure that truth is heard, and that people don't take away from that truth, or what the effects are of the truth. You're still resilient and fighting for. And then the hope is just that understanding of future generations. But I think that it is also about, like, we individually each have a responsibility. And so I look at resilience and hope as actually 2 very challenging and hard words, but actually 2 of the most meaningful and important words in the efforts that any of us take on day to day.
Absolutely. And it's easy words like hope, resilience, change. They're simple words, but yet so hard to understand in today's society around the globe. Miss Liz is globally. What I want from everybody today to just take away of this tea time is share the tea time. Share all the tea times, because they all make a difference. They each have their own individual story that matters. I'm going to bring up the book again so people can see Abigail, because I really want people to see. She was 3 years old, and her father was murdered, and she was held in his arms. We really want to get that message out there, Liz, that she's okay now. She's 6, but she still has the trauma of what happened, that we do not even know the effects of that trauma yet. Is Abigail sharing any of that?
Look, all the kids in Israel, my family's kids, all the kids in Israel have therapists. It's not like it happened. And by the way, when I say all the kids, I mean all the kids that were directly affected or familial affected. But it's a society of children that are traumatized. They run to and from bomb shelters. This is a rough place. And so when you ask that question, Abigail knows that she was in Gaza. She knows that her parents aren't here. She knows a lot. But you also, with children, they have therapists. They have beautiful aunt and uncle who are their parents now. And they share And when they're ready, they share what they want to share. They all go to school. They all have friends. Abigail has this delightful, bigger than life personality. She is the youngest of 6 children now, and she can run the roost. She can rule the roost, I should say, and has, her oldest siblings are twins, and they're just turning 15. They're amazing young men, and she knows how to keep them in line. And her bigger sister, Daniela. And look, like you said very clearly, we're not sure what the effects are. And nobody on this call understands the effects of anything that happens in childhood. But this tragedy and trauma that she went through, and the experience 51 days as a hostage, knowing that her parents were gone, having seen them, I can remember what I told you all about playing Little League and wanting to play at 4.5. She was 3.5, turning 4. She remembers.
And this is the effects. We will never know what the effects are until later in life. We have a question here again, is how can we raise awareness like Liz is doing? And Liz has said this multiple times, but we're going to keep getting that message out there. So Liz, if you'd like to answer this question for this listener out there.
Look, the way you can raise awareness is, one, continue to support this podcast and promote this episode of Miss Liz T. And if you want to really help me, it's to tell people about the book, Saving Abigail. It's available on Amazon. It's a hardcover, it's a soft cover, it's Kindle, it's audio. I do the audio version. And to share that this is a book if people are interested, or if there's people in your communities that you think would love to understand better what happened on October 7th, or they need to be motivated. This book is almost like a handbook of how to go out and fight for something. That's what I give in writing this book. And if you're interested in learning more about me, obviously I have Instagram and I have a YouTube page, but I also would love for you to take a moment and listen to my podcast. My podcast is called Liz's Coffee Connection. And what I do is very similar to this conversation, where I have honest conversations. But mine started, and the majority is political leaders that are very diverse. Like I said, Democrats, Republicans, from all over the country, from big cities, small towns. But I also included to inspiring leaders that I've run across and that I've worked with. And what I believe is that if people listen to Liz's Coffee Connection, it's 30 minutes. It's evergreen, which is also important to me. It's not like political, that if you talk about it on Monday, on Tuesday and Wednesday, it's no longer pertinent. These are interviews that I've had, over 120 of them, leaders, and they're fascinating. They have different backgrounds. And the one thing that when you talk about heart and humanity and you take out the politics and policy, is that you start to understand that we actually have so much more in common than what separates us. And so when you ask how you can support me in terms of, I really go back to go out and fight for something. And I hope I inspire you to go out and believe in yourself strong enough to know that you can make a change, because every one of us can make changes that are important. But myself personally, support my work, support my Instagram, Liz Hirsh Naftali, support the podcast, Liz's Coffee Connection, and share Abigail's story in Saving Abigail. And again, it's a little bit uncomfortable to push myself, but I know that we all have a power in us. And if anything that I am doing is going to help strengthen you or inspire you, please go out. The work I do each and every day is truly inspiring to myself. And that's the part I want everyone to understand. You can inspire yourselves by going out and making a change. And Miss Liz, by having this podcast, is doing it in her way. And that is what we all need to find. Not everyone needs a podcast, but we need to find what we're passionate about and go out and do it. We do make changes. And we're not going to make changes in a global way. We're not the leader of a country. But you know what? I find that we actually make more change when it's person to person than when it is told to us from a leader that is at the top of the government. So I encourage everyone to figure out how to keep building their relationships and going out and building and fighting for what they believe in. I could say that over and over again, and you can keep asking, because it is a scary process, but I believe each and everyone has the potential in them to make a big change. And it's just about starting.
Absolutely. Well, we have a question that just came into the studio, and it says, why are honest conversations so important right now, Liz?
Honest conversations are so important right now because there's a lot of BS out there. And there is a lot of people out there saying stuff that is just, it's just for their, like I said, it's just for the audience. It's just for their bubble.
Performance.
Their performance. And it's for Instagram and all the things that I've just told you to go and check out. But it's not for change. It's for themselves. Yeah. And so when you say, like, why is it so important? Well, it's important that we tell the truth. And it's important that we talk to people who are different than we are. And it's important that I've had a few people on my podcast recently that are religious leaders and political leaders. And love thy neighbor is something that we've been talking about. If you loved your neighbor because he or she was the same as you, there would not be a commandment. There would not be anything about love thy neighbor. Yep. But it goes back to that hard work. And I think that for me, it's that concept of what is the challenge? And the challenge is to love somebody who is different than you. Start with liking them. And so that's why these conversations are important. And that's why it's really important to challenge yourself to go out and meet and be with people that are different.
Absolutely. You know, and you don't have to always agree with them. Like, whatever happened to a good, clean debate? You know, we don't even have that anymore in today's society. It's I'm right, you're wrong, and that's the end of it. There's no clean debates. How do we bring the clean debates back, Liz?
I don't know. I think we start with comment. You know what? I think we sometimes just start with kindness. Like, you smile, you say hello to somebody. They could be so different and you're never going to see them again, perhaps. But you know what? I know that kindness and a smile goes such a long way. And a lot of the times when I meet, and I do a lot of interesting meetings, like I wish I could see people, but I love to have questions. I love to answer questions. I don't want to just go and talk for an hour. But I think that one of the things I also say to people is that everybody's an influencer. We hear about these influencers. They've got hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram or on TikTok. But I think everyone here is an influencer. And it goes back to somebody had asked about telling our story. Tell your story. Whatever your story is. It could be from your childhood, like you asked me. It could be from college. It could be from anything that is impacted you. But tell your story, because what you'll find is people that appear very different may have similar stories of feeling rejected or not included, or how nice it made them feel when somebody asked about them. This is what we are failing to do. It's not so much like the information, it's the relationships. And it starts with kindness. And it also starts with a genuine ability to listen. So I'm talking a lot today, but on my podcast, I like to plant a question, just as you have, and hear the person who's come talk. Because for me right now, I think we go to this place where we're so busy talking and yelling and screaming that we're not having a moment where we can just stop and listen. And that, I think, is something that if we listen better, we'll know what's true and what's not true.
And that's what I was taught at the age of 4 by my Oma, was reflect, recharge, and release. It was just a pause, because when she gave me my first cup of tea at 4, this is where tea time comes from, guys, is my Oma. And I drank that first cup of tea and she's like, no, 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 no. And I was like, oh my goodness, I did something wrong, right? And she wanted me to just take the time to pause, to understand that there's going to be stories out there. And when I was in my 30s, I kept hearing tea time, and I was like, I don't want a bloody cup of tea. What is going on here? But it was a storytelling, that stories needed to come to light. It had nothing to do with the beverage. It had to do with what was in that cup, what we serve to the people, what we serve to our families, our communities, how we make the difference, how we become role models and examples. This is how it all works. And that's what today's Tea Time is about. Is, Liz, you decided to be that role model and that example for these hostages and be the voice for them, because they did have a voice. Did you get to meet some of the other hostages?
Yeah, so first I want to say yes, exactly what you said. I think what you said is really, really important. Um, I know a lot of these hostages and a lot of their families, more the families than the actual hostage, because I was with these families as they were fighting to bring home their loved ones. And Hagar, who is the woman who was with Abigail and her 3 children, is a really incredible human being, and I've gotten to know her quite well. And just to get to see this person who went through so much and still comes out positive, trying to figure out what's the best world for her children, cares about other people's children, that to me is like this incredible message. And then I recently spoke with Aviva and Keith Siegel. They were neighbors of Abigail's family on the same kibbutz, Kfar Aza. And Aviva was a hostage with Abigail. They weren't together, but she was released on the same day, 51 days. But her husband, Keith, wasn't released for another 530 days. And Aviva and I became friends in the work way of like, how do you bring home these hostages? And I have great respect for her. She has a book that's in Hebrew right now, but it'll be coming to America. And it tells her story of her 51 days. And I say that because like each of these people, and there's others that were released, and like young woman Noah Argamani, who was taken at the Nova Music Festival, where over 360 young people were killed. Young people just dancing and listening to music that morning on October 7th. But she was taken as a hostage. And she was released, I don't remember how many days, but a few months, a year into it. And she is just this beautiful young woman in her early 20s that is just starting her life. So when you say, do I know the hostages and do I met them? Yes. But what I really know is their families, because I knew how hard these families were trying. Even like the Bibas boys that were killed and their mother, Sherry. I knew some of their relatives because we were in similar places fighting. So while Abigail was released, I understand the pain of them fighting and then getting their loved ones back deceased. Same with some of the other American families. So, I think that the question is more about the hostage families and the connections that we made, Americans and non-Americans, because there was truly a bond both in Israel and around the world, and especially in Washington, D.C., which was all of us coming together. And I will say this, that many of these hostages, when they came out, like Keith Siegel, one of the first things he did after being there for, I think, 584 days was like fight for the young men that didn't get out for another 6 months, but that he had been with when he was in Gaza. Those are these incredible messages of not stopping until everyone is home. And Aviva Siegel, his wife, she did that for Keith. She did that for all of the hostages. And these are just incredible leaders, incredible people who did not sit back and say, I suffered. They sat back and said, I'm going to make sure these people don't suffer any more than they have to.
And that's what it's about, right? Even though he got out, he was still fighting for the ones that were still there. It's not a celebration. It's let's get everybody home before we can celebrate. And not everybody made it home because there were people that were murdered. And, so how is the community now in your area, Liz?
Look, I think that I will say the Jewish community around the world has seen an uptake in anti-Semitism, and we are looking for allies. We're looking for people that are in support of Israel and that understand we can all not agree sometimes with governments, but that the people of Israel are amazing. The Jewish people have a value of how do we take care of others? How do we work together? And so when you ask, like, for me right now is the support that the Jewish community in America and Canada, around the world, and in Israel, we need allies that are not Jewish to say we support you. Because when you hear about the incredible rise in anti-Semitic activities, violence against Jews all around the world, violence against our houses of worship, I don't know for everybody listening, but when you go to Jewish shuls, synagogues, they have armed guards. Jewish schools, armed guards. You don't see that when you go to churches and mosques around the United States the same way. I can only speak about the US. We are under attack. And all I'm asking is that people support and respect us as people and to fight with us. Because what I've also learned is that if you're anti one group, whether it's the Jews or the Muslims or a certain group right now, that hate can turn around and be right in your face. So I think what I'm asking is that people say, listen, we're here to support you. We're here to fight any hate, whether it's hate against the Jews or hate against the Christians or hate against the Muslims. And so for me, that's a really big message that I leave, and I ask people each time, fight with us and support us. And it goes back to the converse of what I said was, let us be the lights together of what we want to see our world look like.
And it kind of goes into this comment that was just brought up. It's truly inspiring. Hope shines even in the darkness. You know, you talk about the lights of us all coming together and bringing a change. What change would you like to see happen in the future, Liz, for around the globe? Because wars are happening around the world. People are fighting around the world for children's lives and that. What would you like to see change?
I just think how we treat each other. I think that I am not going to stop a war, and nobody listening is going to stop a war. But we can stop how people treat each other. And it goes back to any form of hate. And it starts with like a love and a kindness. And I don't have all the answers. I wish I could answer that person with like what, but it starts with like kindness. It starts with making a difference in your world. And it starts with each of us doing it. You know, the power of humanity is huge. And, you know, we talk about the darkness. There's been many dark times in our history. This is another one I think that we are living through. But there have been many times. And out of those dark times have come some of the greatest advancements and some of the greatest leaders that were not elected, but that reached out in their communities. And names I don't even know, but I know that these are people like myself and like all of us out that were on this call that are out there trying to make a difference. And it is usually in the darkest, hardest times that people see the potential for being a leader. Because when things are easy and life is good and the light is shining, you're not necessarily going to dig really deep down and figure out how to make a change. But it's in the moments when you're being attacked or someone you love is being attacked or when you just see something that is not right, those are the moments that I believe bring out the better and the stronger in each and every one of us. And so while it sometimes is cliche, you know, to say like out of the darkness comes the light, it does, because it makes people like ourselves fight harder and believe more in ourselves to make the change that we want to see in this world.
Absolutely. I had a personal question for you, Liz, here. And it is, if your story were a message, what would it say?
If my story were a message, what would it say? Sometimes we don't know why we're doing something. We don't know why we're busy in life. And I did a lot of volunteer work, and I believed in a lot of things. And I supported, actually, for most of my adult life, a lot of Democratic candidates in America that were women and people of color and minorities, because for me, it was really important to be involved. And I saw that as a way. But then I also had parents that were very respectful of people who were very different. And that made me, even in the work I did being a Democrat, was understanding that we had to see both sides. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is sort of what I spoke about earlier, which is like, I didn't know why I was doing all these things in my life. And then Abigail was abducted and I became a hostage advocate. But I knew that all the things that I had done up until then gave me this opportunity to be a better hostage advocate, someone that could go and do it because I'd done hard things or I had done things that were against the odds. And so I don't really know the perfect answer, but all I know is that whatever we are doing, and we're all busy doing stuff, there is a reason why we do this work. And I don't know, even if it sometimes doesn't manifest itself in this lifetime, but I know that each of us, and I know for myself, and I believe for you, that each day that we do this work, it's building for something. And the other part I'll say is, like, I never mentioned anything like my family would be the victim. I always wanted to help people. But what I also understood was that when it was my family, that I had to give myself the grace of being in a place of asking, demanding, fighting. And that wasn't something I was comfortable with. It was always easier to help somebody. But I learned from this whole thing that it was up to me to go and make that change. And so I think what I learned, and what I hope others will, is like, these are things that can happen to anyone. It should never happen to anyone, but it can. And so in our lives, it is the constant process of trying to be part of a community that is fighting and working together. But if you are ever in a place like I am, where you're just like the victim, or your family has been murdered, and there's a child that you have to go save, you're going to go do it. You're all going to go do it, because you're going to say to yourselves, this is what I have been put here for. And then you're going to find all the things that brought you to that moment, and you're going to go fight for it.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to bring up the book one more time. If you want to tell everybody where they can get the book and where they can find you as well, and spell out your website so the audio listeners can find you.
So the book, Saving Abigail, is available on, I'll start again. The book, Saving Abigail, is available on Amazon. It's as a reading book, a Kindle, and as an audio, but you can also get it on other sites like Barnes & Noble and Walmart. And I think that Saving Abigail is a really important book for people who want to know about the truth of October 7th, want to understand the resilience, and get a little bit of an understanding of how you become an advocate and what it means to actually be an advocate. But it's also a book about hope. It ends with tragedy, but yet how do we turn tragedy into the potential of a better world, which is hard for us to sometimes believe, but I see that right now the work I do from this book, Saving Abigail, is to make our world a better place. And my website is Liz, L-I-Z, Hirsh, H-I-R-S-H, Naftali, Naftali.com. And you can go there and learn all about me. You can go and see all the podcast episodes that I've done, which some of them are just so in tune with anybody that's listening. And then some that you may think, I have nothing in common with this person, but you go and listen and you're just like, wow. And you know what? It's 30 minutes. It's 30 minutes of positive energy. Turn off the news. If anyone's going to ask advice, turn off the news. Let me tell you, whatever you hear at 8 a.m. that gives you heart palpitations and frustrates you, the next day at 8, it's gone and there's something else to replace it. So I think that you should be listening to things like Liz's Coffee Connection, Miss Liz Tea, because right now what we need more is that spiritual feeling of we can make a difference, and less of that news that just makes us feel like we are beat up.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Liz. I really appreciate this. And what would your final message be for my listeners today?
My final message is something I say to myself every day. Be kind to yourself. Remind yourself that you're important and that you have a value. And even when things get really rough, take a moment. We talked about it. Breathe and know that you are special. There is a reason why you are here on this earth. And that is something that only you can feel inside. And then go out and be kind. Go out and be kind to people and make other people feel like you hear them and you see them. And it's a simple thing, but it goes a long way. And it's one of those things about ripples. If you are kind and you share kindness, the ripples become waves. And that is something that is so powerful. And we will never know the results of it because those waves move away from us, but we can start them. But it all starts with each of us. And I just want to say thank you for having me. And thank you to all your listeners. And I appreciate this moment very much, and I will remember it. And I just thank you all, and go out and make a change, but start with being kind to yourself.
Well, thank you so much, Liz. And thank you for all the viewers and people who jumped into the studio and sent me private messages to ask Liz some questions and that today. I could not do this, guys, without all of you guys. It takes a team. And I say it all the time, there's T in me, and that makes the team. We team build together. I'm just going to do a quick wrap up of what today's tea time was, and I will see everybody at 7 p.m. with the last tea time of April, and then we'll jump into the May's guest of lineup. And you can find all of those lineup for May on my Facebook page and all of my other platforms. The press release is there, and you can check out all of those topics as well. But today, what a deeply moving and important conversation. Liz, thank you for your courage, for sharing your story, for standing in truth, and for continuing to advocate not only for your family, but for so many others whose voices still need to be heard. This afternoon, we were reminded that even in the face of unimaginate pain, there are those who choose to rise, to speak, and to fight for something greater than themselves. Your journey shows us that advocacy is not always chosen. Sometimes it is lived into through love, through loss, and through the refusal to stay silent. Here is something to carry with you after this tea time. When something matters deeply to you, do you choose to stay quiet, or do you choose to use your voice? Because change begins when someone is willing to speak, even when it's hard. To everyone listening, awareness matters, compassion matters, and using your voice matters. Until our next cup, share, keep caring, keep listening, and keep standing for what matters. And I want to thank everybody for joining me today on Tea Time, and I'll see you at 7 with the next one.